Welcome to the CLB Forge podcast, brought to you by CLB North American Mission. This is the show to help equip you and your church for mission, ministry, and multiplying disciples.
Welcome to episode 61. I'm Mike Natal.
And I'm Dan Stenberg. We're your hosts, and today we're talking with Kristian Anderson. Kristian was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, where he came to faith, met his wife Mary, and pastored his first congregation, 59th Street, as their youth pastor. Kristian and his wife then felt a call to go to seminary in Minnesota, where he would finish his degree with the hopes of planting a church one day. As he was in seminary, he pastored Living Faith Church in Fergus Falls, Minnesota, until he finished his degree. And after seminary, they felt a call to serve as the campus pastor for Triumph Lutheran Brethren Church in Moorhead, Minnesota, where he served until feeling a call in 2020 to plant a church in Boston. Kristian is currently serving Bethany LBC in East Hartland, Connecticut, as their executive pastor and preparing to plant in Boston in the following year. Kristian and Mary love to travel, eat delicious food, entertain, and teach board games. But most of all, they love serving Jesus together.
Hey, welcome in, Kristian. We're happy to have you. You want to say hi to all of our listeners?
How you doing, everybody? Good to be here. Good to see you guys.
Nice. Yeah, it's great to have you. And we're happy that we can really put the spotlight onto church planting. And we're happy that we can have you on. And then hopefully, potentially, there will be another episode coming later with both you and Mary as our host.
Yeah.
We'd love to get both of you in together to kind of discuss what's going on and to get Mary's opinion on how things are going. And so we got a couple questions for you that we want to ask. Some of them a little bit funny, some of them a little bit serious. And we hope that by the end of it, our listeners and us will have a better understanding of why you feel called to plant a church. And also, what are some of the ways that we can be praying for you as you plant that church?
Yeah.
What are some things that are going on that maybe other people could glean from it if they're thinking, hey, maybe we could call a church planter, or maybe there's a certain area that's local to them that could use a new church or the furthering of the gospel. And we're really just hoping and praying that this episode would kind of facilitate those conversations.
But before we get to all of the important stuff, we do have the classic question that we would like to be asking each of our guests.
Yeah.
And that is, what was your favorite cartoon growing up?
Yeah, I've listened to some of the recent episodes, and I know Tailspin has been mentioned.
It's because it's great.
Numerous
it's
times.
Good. It's good, man.
Baloo and Kit are pretty legit.
Dude, Kit Cow Clicker, man.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Not only was it probably my favorite show, I actually feel like I was educated at the same time, which is Animaniacs.
Bro, let's go.
I'm pretty sure I learned countries of the world and states and capitals by Animaniacs.
Yo, no doubt.
Yeah.
Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Indianapolis, Indiana, and Columbus is the capital of Ohio. Dude, I can do the whole thing. The only pitfall is if you were to ask me what the capital of a certain state is, I then have to immediately sing the entire song to myself.
Yeah.
So you just pray that you don't ask me what the last song is.
It's kind of like the alphabet song where you have to do the whole thing sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm with you.
Nice.
Yep.
Cool. Animaniacs. That's the first one of those that we've had, but that's good. So right out of the gate, here's our first question. As a fellow East Coast guy, I lived in New Jersey. Don't hold that against me. But growing up, I was a Yankee fan, and Kristian, that was one of the first things that you and I shared together when we first knew each other. And so for you, as an avid and vocal New York Yankee fan, how are you feeling about going to the land of the Boston Red Sox?
Yeah, that's, honestly, that's a question I've gotten asked a couple different times. Even living the last 7 years in Minnesota, when people just say, how could you be a Yankees fan? And we just said, it's sort of like original sin,
It's because I don't have a heart.
I was born into it, and I can't do anything about it. That's what it is, But, in all honesty, I think one of the things I love about sports is the camaraderie that you can have through something that you're collectively watching and celebrating. And, what makes something fun is when it's an actual rivalry, right? And so, I was just at Camden Yards at a church planting training. And when we were there, it's it's the Orioles, that's not a real rivalry. But the Red Sox and the Yankees, man, that's a rivalry. When you think about Jason Varitek and A-Rod going at it, and and Pedro, throwing down, the coaches by the helmet. And I think just even as a Yankees fan, I have a lot of mutual respect for the great players that have been a part of the Red Sox. If you go back in the day, like Teddy Ballgame of Ted Williams, or, for me growing up, seeing the rivalry with Pedro and Nomar Garcia Parra, and then Big Papi coming in. And so, and then new guys like Mookie Betts, even though I seriously don't understand how they let him go to the Dodgers, because that's what the Dodgers needed, was another great player. But I just think like that's what makes it exciting. I just came from Minnesota, and usually if you look at sports movies, like the Minnesota Twins are like the team you're supposed to be rooting for. They're like the good guys, and the bad guys in every movie are the Yankees. And so,
Evil Empire.
Actually, that's the name of my fantasy baseball team, is the Evil Empire. And so, in Minnesota, with fans that were just so tired of seeing the Yankees beat up on the Twins in the playoffs, we had a great time of being able to have fun with it. And it was a great way for me to like build relationships with other sports fans and things like that. But I would say too, like I always try to find ways for me to root for the teams that are local. And so like, I'm a big sports fan in general. And so with the NBA, I have just given up on the New York Knicks. James Dolan has just crushed my heart too many times. And so I, like a couple of years ago, of course, that's when they started getting better and made the playoffs. But it just said, I'm just done with the Knicks. And so, I'm kind of in the open market for being able to root for any NBA team. And, usually I can root for a college team as well. And so I could be a Celtics fan and maybe a Boston College fan, but probably not going to become a Pats or Red Sox fan. But those are the ways that I can build some good rivalries with people.
Nice.
So did I just hear you say you could become a BC fan?
Like,
are you trading in your blue and white to become a BC fan?
Here's the thing. I know Mike has season tickets for Penn State, and I did just like hours ago say you should take me to a game. So, listen, for the sake of the gospel, Mike, sometimes we got to do things like that. I'm not trading
be all things to all people. To all people, man.
I'm not trading in my blue and white, but I if wearing an Eagles hat once in a while, and rooting for Matt Ryan, who was a BC grad, I could do that.
I mean, I guess Galen would be very proud of you, but like, I'm just hanging my head in shame, I suppose. So
yeah, sometimes that happens.
Yeah, sometimes it's got to happen. I totally understand that, and that's going to take a little bit of time to digest and set. I understand.
As Mike's wounds like heal, and he's developing the calluses he's going to need there to continue to have a good relationship with you, Kristian. We're going to move on from like the sports talk, which is fantastic, and I love it, but as we look at church planting, as we look at the call that you have accepted and the direction that you're looking to go here, there are other places that would likely be more receptive to a church plant than Boston or a big city. Why are you passionate about planting in a city?
Well, I think there's a couple different answers to that question, but I guess I would first want to answer that question by saying, like, I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. I grew up my whole life there. I never owned a car until I was 31. I didn't own a snow shovel until I was 31. So just in the last 7 years, I went from having 0 things with motors to now I have 5 things with motors, which is 2 cars, a motorcycle, a lawnmower, and a snowblower. So, I'm not really a fan of lawn care.
Because it's the worst.
Yeah, cleaning gutters and mowing lawns. It's just work.
Terrible.
I'm just like, where's my landlord who takes care of stuff? Like, so I guess, to answer that question, like why am I passionate about planting in a city is I'm from a city. I love the city. I love the heartbeat of a city. I love the diversity of a city. I grew up in an area that changed very dramatically in the time that I was a part of it. Only 10% of my elementary school and high school were white, let alone Scandinavian, which is my background. And so I lived in a community that was just didn't always look like me, and I felt like that was a beautiful thing, to seeing just the diversity of ideology, of culture, of thought, of ethnicity, of experiences. Like, I just felt like I got to know the world better by living where I was, and where many people would see crowds and crowded spaces, I saw energy. I loved living in a city that never sleeps. I loved being around and packed places, because it gave me the energy that just something that was important to me. I would say my wife Mary, she feels the same way. I mean, she grew up, she's a pastor's kid, so she was born in Wisconsin, but moved to Long Island as her dad took a call to serve in Huntington Station, Long Island, and spent her adolescence living in Long Island, going into the city quite a bit. Her grandfather was born and raised in Manhattan in Washington Heights before he helped see a church planted. Actually, at the church I'm serving now is where her grandfather helped, really start this church, and he was a part of some of the really seeing this church grow. And so we have deep roots in the city on both sides of our family. Mary moved to Fergus Falls to finish out high school when her dad took a job in the synodical offices of the Church of Lutheran Brethren, working in home missions. And he, as somebody who was a part of church planting himself. And so Mary moved back to Manhattan, went to Barnard, which is part of Columbia University, and then stayed in Manhattan because she loved the city. And so that's something that's both been on our hearts. So I'd say first, just the fact that we're people who love cities and have spent a lot of our life living in cities. The second part is that, church plants should be happening wherever people are, bottom line. We need church plants in rural areas. We need church plants in suburban areas, and we need church plants in cities. We have been commanded to fulfill the Great Commission, which is to go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing and teaching them. The Church of Lutheran Brethren, which I'm a CLB pastor. I do feel like the CLB has something to contribute the larger kingdom of God, and I want to be a part of that. But the CLB has not had a huge foot in urban areas in the United States, especially in the last 75 years. And so we need to be where people are, and the people who are going to be a part of that mission are the ones that might be most suited to be there. And I think Mary and I have always felt in our hearts, in our marriage, that church planting is probably something that we should be a part of and see happen, and being open to that calling in our life, and knowing that, like, because we love all areas. It's been fun to, like, I live in a town of 2,000 people right now, and we're doing life, and we've loved it. We lived in Fergus Falls for 3 years and felt like that was a great time for us, and what that contributed. Then we lived in Fargo Moorhead for 4 years in a small city of like 250,000 people in the greater Fargo Moorhead area, and now looking to be back in Boston. And even though, like, our roots are in New York, that's one of the largest cities. So we've felt like we've been able to serve anywhere and anywhere that God has called us. But we also see that as God has kind of put this on our hearts, like, it's lining up with a lot of where our passions are. Cities have changed. The population in cities have changed quite a bit. Al Mohler, who was the former president of the Southern Baptist Convention, he said in his speech a couple years ago that I listened to, he said, it's amazing to see what's happened in the world in the last 300 years. 300 years ago, 3% of the population lived in urban areas. Compared to now, we're looking at closing in on 80% of people in the world living in urban areas. And so you've just seen a huge change in the population migration. And so we want to be, again, like I said before, we want to be where people are. Pew Research has also done a lot of stuff too, where looking at younger people and younger leaders, they more often want to live in cities where culture is forming. And so if we want to have an influence on the young leaders of our country, we need to have churches where those young people are. And so we want to be in cities. So yeah, as I kind of think of that question, I think those are some of the reasons why we feel passionate about being and planting in a city.
Yeah, and I would say to go off of that too. So Christian's been called by a partnership of sister churches in New England, Faith Chapel, which is the church that I currently pastor at, Praise, which is where Evan Langlois is, and then Bethany, which is where Christian is currently serving alongside Roger Vixness. And as the five of us, because Wes Asham was a part of this too, as the five of us kind of got, and Ryan Nielsen too, as we got together and we were spending time with each other as just five pastors hanging out, Roger brought up and he's like, maybe we should do more than just hang out and just talk and like try to encourage each other. Like maybe God's going to use us and our churches to plant a new church in New England. And this was probably about 4 or 5, oh man, maybe even longer than that, 5 years ago, where we started to kind of vision cast. And I've actually told this story before, but as we started talking and as we started, trying to figure out who should we talk to, who would be a good fit for this, our initial person that we really felt led to was Christian. And as you read, Daniel, in your in Christian's bio, he had just taken a call to Triumph, and we were like, well, he's now pastoring at Triumph. We don't know if he'd want to be a part of this given everything that's been going on. And we really were just like, you know what, if God wants to make it happen, he will make it happen. And so we just kind of sat on it for a little bit. And then we took a trip up to Boston. We did a prayer walk as our church, as our three churches together. And it was pretty obvious to us that we were being called to plant a church in Boston. And so more than ever, we were like, oh, Christian is so the guy. Him and Mary, like the two of them together would just be a powerhouse in Boston. And we reached out to Christian, and sure enough, he accepted the call. And now he's in kind of like a little pre-launch right now at Bethany. And it's kind of amazing that it's worked out the way that it has. And I've learned a lot about church planting over the last 5 years in terms of success rate, in terms of support, in terms of how to properly help in ways. And yet Christian and I meet on a weekly basis, and I feel like there's stuff that I overlook on a regular basis. So I appreciate the time that Christian and I have had together. But the success rate with church plants aren't incredibly high, unfortunately. We wish that we could say 100% of church plants make churches and are still in existence, but the reality is it's not incredibly high. And so knowing that statistic, you're still willing to devote the time and the physical and emotional energy into church planting. And my question is why?
Yeah, just to backtrack quickly for a second, I've seen so I came to Christ when I was 22, and I had experienced the church. I had gone to Tuscarora as a child. I had my best friend, his dad was an elder at 59th Street, and was an image bearer of Christ to me in my life at different points. That was important. And so, I've seen how God has used things in my life, even when I didn't know him, even though I didn't know he was my savior or my Lord, that he was preparing me for ministry and utilizing all of my experiences in my life. And I saw how God is using those. I think too, like even other things that have happened, it's been interesting to look back and see, when I applied for college, I only applied to college in two places, New York City and Boston. And for me, that was where I wanted to be in cities that were like that. I wanted to be in places where people wore their heart on their sleeve, where, where just so much of the energy and and just the passion that I felt from those two cities. And that was the place I grew up, and that's the place where God's calling me to plant a church. And so, looking back and seeing that, just, just seeing like, yeah, that God has written this part of our story well before we knew it. And just, I'm in awe of just the sovereignty of God. And when I look back at that, looking at the power that God has, and creating those plans for us, and providing those things, and those ways for him to situate us for those things that he's called us to. So, thinking about just the reality of the success rates and things like that, that they're not incredibly high. Why would we want to devote that kind of a time? First and foremost, I want to see new people come to Christ. I want to see people who don't know Jesus come to know who Jesus is. And I'll be honest with you, that probably the reason why that's so much on my heart is because I know exactly what it's like to live a life in darkness. I know exactly what it's like to live my life where I am my own hope, and that I am the one that has to provide and pave the way for myself. And just the crushing weight that is, that there is only hope in ourselves, and living that way, and living in that darkness, and just knowing that there are other people who are in those same positions. And I want to tell them about Jesus and what he has done for them, and that our hope is not in ourselves, but it's in him, and it's in his accomplished work on the cross, that he has won victory over the grave. That's the things that I want to tell people about. And so why church plant? For one reason is church plants are the most successful in reaching new people. When you look at congregations and you think about the newer people that are a part of congregations, if in a church plant, 60 to 80% of their members of a new church are people who were not a part of a worshiping body previous to that. So 3 or 4 out of 5 people that are a part of a church plant were not part of a worshiping body. While at the same time, in established churches, 80 to 90% of new people that come to established churches are from other churches. And so that's a great place for established churches to be able to create homes for people that might be moving to different areas of the country that already know Jesus, and that's fantastic. But church plants are often the places that are the most effective to reaching the unreached. It's not a one or the other. It's us both doing the work of the kingdom of God, but working inside of that. So I mean, that's where part of my heart is the reality is that church plants have to be the most the most open to the needs of the unchurched, simply because they don't have a congregation to have to meet their needs. And so by just the sheer reality of a church plant, they have to be most apt to the understanding what the needs of the unchurched are, to contextualize their ministry, to best reach the unchurched and the unreached, because they don't have a congregation that they are having to meet those needs of. And so, when I think about that, to me, the success rates are not necessarily a part of the equation. They're a part of knowing it and knowing the reality. And I'd love to answer in just a second, just what are some things that we're doing that hopefully increase our success rate as we're entering into this. But just what comes to the mind the most part is that we want to reach new people, and that's why we're going to church plant. The CLB has always gone to people who are hardest to reach. It's a part of our DNA. It's a part of who we are. Ever since we began, we wanted to go to places that did not know the gospel, and Boston is one of those places that has had an initial rich history of the gospel, starting in Boston and working out to the larger New England area. But it's pretty hard soil right now. And so we need people who are willing to go, who are willing to answer that call, and to bring the gospel to a city that desperately needs it. I think also thinking about the success rates, we're trying to think through and I'm very happy for Cultivate being the partner organization that's really doing our sending. But we as a collective have thought about like, what are some of those things that we can do ahead of time so that we can be most successful in what God wants to do. Not that this creates a perfect equation or a recipe, but I think the more things that we can eliminate that potentially could be pitfalls, the better we're going to situate ourselves to do effective ministry. Some of those, is having a longer timeline. I think one of the things that I've listened to for people who are planting churches, they think about, oh, well, I got to be self-sustaining in 3 years from now. And maybe that was something that was successful or a strategy for denominations in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, 80s, where they could pour in resources for 3 years, give you that 3 years, and then you need to be self-sustaining by year 4. That was potentially possible. And I think the CLB can see even success with that kind of a model during those decades. But that's no longer really a viable model. And so when I've listened to planters talk about needing to be self-sustaining by year 3, that really, they start to put the cart before the horse in so many of those different areas. And so one of the things that Cultivate talked to me about, and that I have expressed along with my wife, is just saying, like, how do we look at saying, like, let's make a 10-year plan. Like, let's look at, like, this is our home. This isn't just a mission field. This is our home that we're going to live. We're going to create life. We're going to create our history and our family. And so just having a longer timeline when we think about just the success of that mission.
And we heard that even echoed in. So I just did a podcast with Dave and Sonia Narveson, and Dave was talking about one of the struggles being feeling like he had to get everything done within a certain time frame, and then talking to the other Chadian missionaries there, and they're like, dude, we got a 20-year plan. Like, slow down. You can't necessarily do this as fast as you're trying to get this done. And so seeing how, and that's true. I mean, you're living with the people, you're getting into their lives, you're doing this, and that doesn't happen overnight. And so recognizing that that's a great way of moving forward, not only for our international missions, but also for our home missions, recognizing that those who are planting churches, it's okay to take a bit more time and to have a longer time frame than 3 years. 3 years is like nothing, like that's a blip. And we recognize that in some areas, and we need to be able to recognize that in all of our different contexts, that this isn't just something that we see overseas, that it is possible and necessary to get into the cultures here in America too. And so I'm glad you bring that up. I think it's a good even like,
yeah.
Yeah.
So I would say, looking at a longer timeline, that's actually something that like Pastor Eric Sorensen and I have talked about, and just working together, and me hearing about just the successes of Epiphany, of bringing people to Christ, but thinking also just about like, how can we look at a longer timeline for us to have a more of an established church, and stretching that out is something that he gave the advice of going, that's really going to create a more successful way for you to plant. And so I've really appreciated advice from him on stuff like that. Also just thinking about like just the resources that it takes to plant. It takes to plant anywhere, but especially planting in a city, just having some of those things carved out in a longer timeline as well. Question that was on my wife and my heart, which is like, making sure that there are systems in place for the health of the church planter and his wife and his team. So like Cultivate's talked about going like, hey, how can we like take you guys out for dinner, periodically? How can you guys come here and get a weekend off, or one of us can come in and mainly like, do the house church for you, and just, or how could we be praying for you and our churches, and creating some teams that I'm going to talk about later, but just creating teams that are going to be supportive of this and intercede on our behalf. Like, that's going to increase our ability to have success. And then I think lastly is just building a core team of people who are going to be with us. I mean, that we're not going there alone. Actually, I've listened to some of our international missionaries and Dan Benberg and just them talking a little bit about even international missionaries, just like our North American missionaries, like the success goes up when we're going out 2 by 2 versus going out solo. And so thinking
biblical
about
model. What do you know? It works, right?
I know it's crazy. Yeah. But yeah, just thinking about just like who are those people who are going to be moving and living life with us shoulder to shoulder
Right.
in the city of Boston. So I think those are things that we're thinking about that don't necessarily create a perfect recipe or an equation, but they eliminate some of the pitfalls that could get in our way. And I think that's what this year is really about, is us being able to eliminate some of those things that could distract us or get in the way, to the best of our ability, and allow God to do what he is going to do through us.
That's awesome, man. And it's great to hear that, and to be able to hear the plan going forward. Obviously it's not easy. Church planning is not a simple thing. But it's good to know how to pray, and also to like just look at how you're approaching the difficulties head on. And I mean, thinking of difficulties, you also think of the encouraging things that go along with church planting. What have you found most encouraging in this church planting process?
Yeah, I'd say that the first and foremost thing that's been encouraging is being a part of Cultivate New England.
Yeah, you better say that. Now I give you $20 next time that I see you. Nice job.
Actually, I'm just trying to make sure that I still get to go to a Penn State game next year. But no. But in all seriousness, like one of the things that I talked to Cultivate about was coming here for this kind of year where I get to do some organizational leadership and executive work for Bethany in particular. Being able to build partnerships with all three churches, and for them to be thinking that they're not sending a mercenary or just a missionary, but they're sending a friend, and they're sending somebody who they care about, and that Mary and I care about them, and a mutual spurring on when it comes to mission work. That's like one of the things that, like, when I've come there, I've wanted to hopefully at the same time of not only telling people about what we're doing and for them to encourage Mary and I, but at the same time, like for me to encourage them in their gospel work, like in their local ministry, and like how do they think about mapping out their mission field and being on mission where they are in their workplace or in their neighborhood or wherever they are. And so just that mutual encouragement. Once a month I am outside of Bethany. I'm either in the city of Boston, or I'm at Praise Christian Fellowship in Barkhamsted, or I'm at Faith in Cranston, and just being there for the weekend, being there for Sunday, being able to preach and proclaim the word, but also just building those relationships and finding those other opportunities for us to be together. So that's been a huge encouragement. Just hearing those people in our corner and that are reaching out and praying for us and just getting to know us. That's been a big thing. This sounds kind of funny, but another thing that's been most encouraging is being clueless. I know it sounds funny, but it's true. When I find myself without the ability to rely on my own expertise or rely on my own knowledge or rely on my own experience, what it does is it drives me to my knees. And being on my knees in reliance to God is a good place to be. And so being at a place like that is encouraging, because it means that I know that I'm reliant on God to do what he's doing forward. I also think just some of the initial conversations I've been having with people has been encouraging to me, of people who are open to signing on to being a part of our core team, or people who are willing to pray about it. Some that are in the city of Boston, some that are maybe a part of our partner churches, and some people who live actually around our country, who are considering maybe being a part of that mission. That's been really encouraging to me. And then lastly, that my wife is as excited as I am to be a part of this mission. That we both feel the call, that we both are making the plans, that we're both having those conversations with people, and that we're shoulder to shoulder in this. That's been encouraging for me in a huge way.
That's fantastic. That's great. And I hope that other churches that are listening here that that again, one of the biggest encouragements he has is a group of churches coming around the church planter, calling that church planter together. I don't know where you're at, but man, if you're thinking about calling or planting a church, if you're thinking about doing something along that line, if God's been putting that on your heart, and a group of churches getting together and planting a church is fantastic. And it's such an encouragement for the planters. So if you're in that situation, man, I would encourage you to be praying about it and moving forward, and just knowing that that's a great situation for a church planter to be in an encouraging situation.
And it's a great form of camaraderie too, as being one of the churches that benefit from being part of Cultivate New England and having Kristian as our missionary to Boston. We have benefited in the close knitness of our other sister churches, which has been tremendous. Right. And I'll be honest and totally transparent, that's something that has been lost, at least in our three churches, that used to be huge. So our churches used to talk about how, on Sunday we used to get done and then we would immediately leave and we would go join praise, or we would go and join Bethany, or people from Bethany would just randomly show up to Faith one day. And I'm sure that they already know this, but like our church, Faith, Bethany was instrumental in helping Faith get off the ground, in the same way that both Bethany and Faith were instrumental in helping Praise as they began. Mm-hmm. And so over the years, we've kind of gone in different directions in terms of camaraderie and fellowship. But now with this church plant, it's coming back. Like we're having fellowship together. We're doing stuff together. The prayer walks, some worship services that we've done together as a joint congregation has been just incredibly beneficial and encouraging for our churches as well. So Kristian, what do you feel is the most daunting in this church planting process?
I have no idea what I'm doing. I mean, there's
that's not getting edited, so
yeah,
I like it. I like it.
But I think like, okay, I know how to talk to people. As a youth pastor in Brooklyn, I had at that time one church kid, and I think at our height we had 70 or 80 kids who were involved in our youth ministry program. So 69 to 79 of them were not from the church, and one of them was. So I'm not necessarily daunted by getting to know people who don't know Jesus and are kind of living life within the world. Like I'm the only Christian in my family, so those conversations and that kind of stuff is not necessarily daunting. So I know how to do that. I know how to preach. I know how to preach. I know how to read a commentary. I know a lot about even just the need for church planting. But as of right now, I don't know too much about planting a church. And so I'm thankful that I have a year where I can do some of that training and, getting a coach to start to give me some of that coaching that's from Boston, who's been doing ministry there. So we're looking to get that set up here pretty soon. And then looking for more opportunities for myself and my wife and even some of our core team members to be a part of like some training so that we're prepared to do some of that work together. So I think part of it is just like, complete unknown and the reality of that. Although it's exciting to think about like the opportunity for gospel work in Boston, it's also daunting to think about, New England is one of the most de-churched areas, not only in our country, but really in our world. All 6 New England states are in the top 10 of most post-Christian or least religious states in the United States. So out of the 10, 6 of them are New England states. So that's just the reality of doing ministry here in the New England area. Many people that have done work there in the city of Boston have said there's probably about 3% of the population has heard an authentic presentation of the gospel And so just thinking about the reality of the hard soil, Massachusetts, according to like World Population Review, is talked about as the least religious state, right next to New Hampshire. And so, just thinking about, just the receptivity is definitely different in a place like Boston than it is in many maybe other areas of our country. And so that is daunting. I think also, typically in church planting, and they have a larger core team than probably what but than what Mary and I might have, although God has the ability to change that, and I'm very open for him changing that if he so desires.
And I mean, the podcast goes out to a wide range of people. And so if there's an individual who's listening right now that may be interested in relocating and being a part of your core team, hey, maybe this is one of those ways that you get introduced to them.
Yeah.
There you go.
I can offer you Jesus,
Nice.
smoked meats.
Nice.
I often smell like hickory smoke. And I love
delightful.
Make my own homemade pizzas on my uni, and so I can feed you.
Not as good as me, but he's working on it.
Listen,
just saying.
I'm getting up there. I'm coming for you, Natal.
You bring it.
Okay. Well, as you continue to move forward in this process of planting in Boston, how would you like the CLBA, those listening, those part of our churches, how would you like us to be praying for you as you continue on this crazy journey?
Yeah. Well, like you just said, maybe you're listening to this right now and you're thinking about, like, I'm not really sure what God might be doing in my life, and I'm maybe looking for a bigger purpose and a mission that I could really be a part of. That is something that's exciting, that's beyond myself. Talk to me. I'd love to talk with you and pray with you. Whether that's about joining what we're going to be doing in Boston or helping you be more on fire for where God has you right now. So that'd be one way. I think, praying for those initial people who are going to be part of that core team, that'd be a great way for the church to be praying for us. Also just be praying for the people who are going to be part of our two support teams, one being our prayer team and the other one being our financial support team. So just praying for the people to be a part of those things. So we have people who are interceding on our behalf and basking us in prayer. Actually just had a conversation with somebody who is from the Midwest who's thinking about coming, and
awesome.
And we were talking to them this past week, and they said, actually, could I back up for a second? We were out in the Midwest and we actually met up with them and to talk about this potential and for them to pray about it. And I asked them, I said, would you guys be open for me to share your names with with Cultivate so that I could ask them to start to pray? And they said that would be okay. And so I did that. And so this last week they called up and just said, I know you asked us for people to pray, and I could tell they were, because we're interested in maybe coming up and actually scouting out an area with you and coming up, maybe at the end of this summer. And so
awesome.
Just seeing the power of prayer, and that could be just a huge way for, and the narrowing of that prayer over those three areas of our core team, of being a part of our consistent prayer team, and maybe our financial support team. So I think those are the areas. I don't know if you know how to reach me. You can reach me at Kristian.Anderson@gmail.com. I'm also, right now, since we haven't picked our target area or the name of our church plant yet, and so when those things are, some of my ways of communication to the church plant will be different. But right now, you could reach us at cultivatenewengland.org or clba.org/Boston, or find us on social media at either Facebook or Instagram, our place that you can find Cultivate New England or myself individually.
Great. So thanks, Kristian. You were a tremendous guest. We appreciate having you on, and we look forward to the next time that you're on, and hopefully Mary will be able to join.
Yeah, man.
We'll have both of you on. So thank you so much, Kristian, for being a part of the podcast. We appreciate your insight, and I know that many people will be praying for you. Once again, if you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking, man, I maybe feel that the Lord is calling me to go to Boston, reach out. Totally reach out to either Kristian, reach out to me, reach out to the people at Cultivate New England, which would be me or Kristian. So any of those interfaces, you would get a hold of someone who could redirect you if you're feeling led that way. So thank you so much to our listeners for supporting our show today and for listening. Once again, if you want more information, you can go to Cultivate New England, all one word.org, and that's where our website's at. We're also going to link a new video that just is getting released thanks to Micah. He did a great job putting it together, and we look forward to being able to share it with you as well. Don't forget to subscribe to our show. Podcasts usually drop on Tuesdays, and so if you subscribe, you would get a notification when it drops. And we would really appreciate it if you'd share this podcast with a friend or a colleague. We thank you so much for listening, and we will catch you next time.
Adios.
Thanks.
This has been an episode of the CLB Forge podcast, brought to you by CLB North American Mission. Thanks for listening. We welcome your questions and comments. Email us at podcast@clbforge.org.